Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for delaying it for 5 minutes. We've still got some people coming through the fog, including the lady who's our court reporter who takes down the minutes of all this stuff, the testimony of all this stuff. Our staff was on the telephone with her explaining that it's foggy at Stockton, although she lives here, and how to get to the meeting. I'm Phil Eisenberg. I'm chair of the Delta Stewardship Council. Thank you very much for coming out. Particularly thank you for coming out on a night like this. We'll try to get you home before it's totally socked in, but no promises. A couple of things. As you came in the door, there are two documents, among others, you should pick up if you don't mind. This little booklet is a copy of the governance law that was adopted by the legislature, signed by the governor in 2009. It's kind of the driver for this process. And secondly is a package of papers called a notice of preparation, which is the first step on a legal process to do what the legislature told us to do. Sitting up here, many of you probably know already, the chairman of the Delta Protection Commission, Supervisor Don Natoli, Sacramento County, hails from Galt and has been on the Board of Supervisors for 17 years. And before that served as Supervisor Toby Johnson's chief staff guy, and many of us knew him in that capacity. Also, there's some folks from the Delta Stewardship Council in back with some information. A couple other things. We are tape recording this to post on our website so that the public can get a copy, listen to a copy of tonight's proceedings. And so it's very helpful if you can use the microphone that's there when you talk. And also, these are speaker request forms, and the court reporter, when he or she gets here, is going to tell us, as they always do, I didn't quite get the name of the speaker. Did you have a form so I can get the name spelled correctly? So our staff is going to ask you, if you haven't filled one of these out, to do it, and they're going to hold a penmanship quiz for the court reporter, if you don't mind. Anyway, just a fast intro, and I'm going to turn it over to Keith Coolidge, who's the deputy director of our operation. The legislature did a big bill package on water in 2009. Governor signed it, included a lot of elements, including a bond issue slated for election 2 years from now. But they also created a new governance body, Delta Stewardship Council. 7 of us are appointed to the council. Don, because he is the chairman of the Delta Protection Commission, was the very first member, because he was already sitting and the statute appointed the president of the Delta Protection Commission. By the way, their executive director, Mike Machado's somewhere. There he is. He's never hiding, but he's there. Mike's the head of the Delta Protection Commission staff. And the legislation appointed 7 people, and they gave a duty and an obligation to the new Delta Council. They said, by January 1st, 2012, you must develop, adopt, and begin implementing a legally enforceable Delta plan. And that sounds like just a simple statement. You see a lot in legislation, but it is an extraordinarily short timeline. Because it is a legally enforceable document, it is a state regulation. And because of that, we are doing a full environmental impact report on the process. This scoping meeting, this first discussion session, which is really an opportunity for the public to comment, is a part of a very long process. And as Keith is going to explain to you, the process we're underway will involve 7 draft versions of a Delta plan and numerous iterations of an environmental impact document going through the months. Here's what the process roughly is. February 14th, next month, the first staff recommended draft Delta plan will be posted on the website. The council's going, Don yells at this, all of us yelled at it. We normally do two days of meetings a month. We're going to 4 days of meeting a month in March, April, and May. And those meetings, not exclusively, but overwhelmingly, will be devoted to background material and research early in each month, and then a 2-day hearing on the first draft Delta plan, the second draft Delta plan the next month, the third draft Delta plan. There'll be an adopted draft plan in May, and then a 45-day public review period. And I haven't talked to Don about it, but I predict that we will be back to 4 days of meeting in September, October, and November. In order to keep the statutory deadline, we have to adopt the Delta plan in November of 2011 that gives it to a state agency review. That's the only way to keep on track. Very complicated, very difficult time process, but important. The statute did a couple things, and Keith's going to amplify on it. The statute did something called adopt state policy, defining what are called co-equal goals. And many of you have been involved in this stuff. You're familiar with it, but for some of you who are not, in this little book, which is the statute, there's a table of contents in the front that codes it. And if you go to the just phrase that says co-equal goals and turn to page 23, it's a pretty important stuff because it lays out the foundation of what's going on. And let me just do it. Co-equal goals means the two goals of providing a more reliable water supply for California and protecting, restoring, and enhancing the Delta ecosystem. New sentence. The co-equal goals shall be achieved in a manner that protects and enhances the unique cultural, recreational, natural resource, and agricultural values of the Delta as an evolving place. Let me just tell you, that was a deeply contentious little phrase. The bill's full of other things, 8 objectives we have to achieve in endless directions and so on. We can get into that later. But this meeting is largely a listening session for us, and the importance of transcribing it, and our court reporter's here. Congratulations on surviving the fog. The reason we're so careful on documenting this stuff is because it is a legal process, and we want to have the record, and we also want to have a record of your formal comments and anything you choose to give us in writing. We've gotten, 3,000 comments about 5 days ago because the Sierra Club had all kinds of people send us emails. That was a little bit of a shock. But we're in the thousands and thousands of comments, including a lot of very precisely honed formal statements by organizations, by local governments, by other state agencies, occasionally by federal agencies. And we would encourage you anytime during this process this year to utilize that. We post all the communications on the website so everybody can take a look at it. And so your comments are formally recorded. So in any event, that's kind of an introduction. We're going to be listening as we go through. As you think you might want to say something, if you fill out one of these cards, and in the back is Mr. Eric Alvarez, among others, they can collect the blue cards from you, bring them forward. We'll just call on you in the order in which we've gotten them. So, Mr. Keith Coolidge, the Deputy Director, Delta Stewardship Council.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My job was to vamp until the court reporter got here. So, stop me if you've heard this before. The chair was very eloquent in going through. 2 members of the council here tonight, Chairman Phil Eisenberg, Member Don Natoli from the Delta Protection Commission as well. I'm Keith Coolidge, the Chief Deputy Director for the Delta Stewardship Council. In the back, Eric Alvarez and Terry McCauley, our Deputy Director for Planning. And our lead consultant on the project, Gwen Buchholz from CH2M Hill. All of us are here tonight. If you have questions afterwards and want answers, please hunt one of us down. We'll be in the room as long as you are here to answer questions. Tonight, this is a scoping meeting. It's part of a formal EIR process. It is to... We are doing both a Delta plan required by the legislature and an environmental impact report on that plan. We're doing them simultaneously because, as the chair said, the deadline we got from the legislature of January 1 of next year, very tight time frame. So we are doing these simultaneously. Tonight is a scoping session. The purpose is to receive input from community members and agencies on the topics that they think need to be evaluated. If, as the chair said, in the back of the room was the notice of preparation. It talks about what we're trying to do in this plan, what the legislature told us we needed to do, the 8 objectives. As we look at that and evaluate environmental impacts, we are looking for your help right now as part of the scoping session to make sure that we are looking as wide and as broad as possible in considering all of the alternatives that will need to be considered as part of both the plan and the environmental review. We are structuring this tonight as both a council meeting and as a scoping session because council members wanted to be here, and our third council member, Patrick Johnston, is coming up to the front of the room. And so we wanted to make sure that if we had a quorum, we were duly noticed. The council members are very actively involved in this. As the chair said, they're going to be meeting 4 times a month. They are going over multiple drafts of this. All of our meetings are webcast. Yes, they occur during the day, generally in Sacramento, West Sacramento or in the Delta, but the meetings are also archived. So if you really want some fun entertainment, curl up on a foggy night with your computer and watch archived video of a council meeting. Did we go through that? I'm going backwards. The chair talked about the co-equal goals. This was state law. It was hotly debated, but as he read it to you, this is really the underpinning of all things that will be in the Delta plan, or helping to guide. It's a legally enforceable plan, and it will help guide state and local agencies to ensure that the co-equal goals, the state's co-equal goals for the Delta, are met. You look at the notice of preparation, the Delta plan is the last in a line of efforts to pull together a wide set of alternatives and programs and projects that need to move forward in the Delta. What makes this different is that it is both legally enforceable and it is clearly designed to meet the state's co-equal goals. The law spells out the program objectives. They are in the notice of preparation, but there are 8 objectives that the plan must meet: managing the Delta's water and environmental resources and the water resources of the state over the long term. The objective of this plan goes out to 2100. Number 2 is to protect and enhance the unique cultural, recreational, and agricultural values of the California Delta as an evolving place. Number 3 is to restore the Delta ecosystem, including its fisheries and wildlife, as the heart of a healthy estuary and a wetland ecosystem. Number 4 is to promote statewide water conservation, water use efficiency, and sustainable water use. Number 5 is to improve water quality to protect human health and the environment consistent with achieving the water quality objectives in the Delta. To improve the water conveyance system and expand statewide water storage. Number 7 is to reduce risk to people, property, and state interests in the Delta by an effective emergency preparedness, appropriate land uses, and investment in flood protection. And then lastly, to establish a new governance structure with the authority, responsibility, accountability, scientific support, and adequate and secure funding to achieve these objectives. That's what the legislature told us the Delta plan needed to do. As a result, when you look at that, and there's a map in here that talks about the project area, we've had a lot of comments so far. Why aren't you just focused on the Delta? This is the Delta Stewardship Council. This is the Delta plan. But when you look at the objectives that the state has assigned, you really need to look both at the upstream watershed areas as well as the export areas that use water from the Delta. And so that's why there's a map in here. It's colored red, and it does stretch from the very far north on the Sacramento Valley down all the way to the Mexican border. That is the study area of the plan. And I should talk a little bit. There are many other plans in the works right now. The Department of Water Resources is developing the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan. The Delta Protection Commission has done a resource management plan, a recreation plan. There's also the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, known as BDCP. BDCP is specifically called out in the legislation and says that if it meets all of the objectives that are set forth in law to be a natural communities conservation plan, if that is determined by Fish and Game that they meet that litmus test, as well as others that are spelled out in the Delta Reform Act, then it becomes a part of the Delta Plan. Right now, it's lagging probably several months to a couple of years behind schedule. The chair has promised the Delta Plan will meet its objectives of January 1. And so we'll be talking a lot over the next 2 months with council meetings and in drafts how we lay out objectives and how we deal with a plan that isn't going to be completed and can't be incorporated into the Delta Plan until it is, and until it meets all of those objectives set out in law. This is meeting number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. One to go. This is the 6th of scoping meetings. We have done these around the state in the last 2 weeks, starting in Diamond Bar in Southern California, wending up through the Central Valley in Merced, over to Concord in the Bay Area. We were in downtown Sacramento yesterday morning and in Clarksburg last night. Tonight is Stockton, and then we'll go up to Chico tomorrow night, trying to get as wide a range as possible, understanding that we can't go everywhere and that we are leaving some folks out. We are trying very hard to encourage you tonight both to give your comments orally, taken down by the court reporter, fill out those little blue cards for the right name spelling. But if you brought written comments tonight, leave those as well so that we can include those in the record. Every piece of correspondence, everything that anyone submits to the Delta Stewardship Council is posted online, generally within a day, so that everyone has a chance to see what is going into, see the evolving record, see what others are thinking. And so we encourage you, if you didn't bring it in writing tonight but still want to drop it, there are email addresses, and that's probably coming up on the next slide. Oral comments, email to Delta Plan Scoping at Delta Plan, not deltacouncil.ca.gov, or by mail to Terry McCauley, 989th Street, Suite 1500, Sacramento. The website is actually Delta Council, not Delta Plan, so go to deltacouncil.ca.gov and you'll get to the right website. But truly, everything is going to be a part of the record. The oral audio recording from tonight will be posted as of all the other scoping sessions. So it is really a good record of everyone's comments. All of this will be in a summary report to the board on Thursday of this week. Final scoping report will be at the end of February, and February 14th on Valentine's Day, that will be the first of, as the chair said, 7 different drafts of the Delta Plan. It is meant to be an iterative process. It is meant to grow and to develop as comments are received from you all, as comments are received from the council, as we try to find the right way to meet both the co-equal goals and the 8 objectives that were spelled out by the legislature in the Delta Reform Act. With that, I should, Joe usually does this, and he likes to leave it on the co-equal goals as we actually open the formal scoping session, and with that, I would turn it over to the chair.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, again, if you have blue forms, just give them to one of the staff. They'll move them up here. I'm taking people in the order that we got it. So the first presentation is from Mr. Jonas Minton. Mr. Jonas Minton, there you are. Mr. Minton. If you would state your name, spell the last name just for the court reporter, if you would, please. If you have an organizational affiliation, also mention that so she can take that down, please.
Good evening. I'm Jonas Minton with the Planning and Conservation League. My name is spelled Jonasminton. Tonight we are presenting the consolidated recommendations of 30 environmental justice, fishing groups from throughout California. Because this is on the record and we'll be handing out written copies, we have 50 here, so those who like them, please let my colleague Mark know. Mark, Bill Jennings, and Barbara Berrigan-Perea will be assisting in this brief presentation. Because this is for the record, I will read off the names of the organizations on whose behalf we are presenting these comments. These are comments of the Sierra Club California, Natural Resources Defense Council, Defenders of Wildlife, Environmental Defense Fund, Planning and Conservation League, California Water Impact Network, the Bay Institute, Restore the Delta, Friends of the River, California Sports Fishing Protection Alliance, California Coastkeeper Alliance, Environmental Justice Coalition for Water, Endangered Species Coalition, the DSAL Response Group, Clean Water Action, Friends of Trinity River, Pacific Coast Federation of Fishermen's Associations, Northern California Council of Federation of Fly Fishers, Foothill Conservancy, Northern California River Watch, Aqua Alliance, Southwest Council Federation of Fly Fishers, Save Our Streams Council, Friends of Eel River, Sacramento River Preservation Trust, Institute for Fisheries Resources, Santa Clara County Creeks Coalition, Fish Sniffer, Southern California Watershed Council, and the Environmental Water Caucus. As you can see, this is a fairly large assemblage. We took to heart your request that to the maximum extent possible, we coalesce so that you're not necessarily faced with individual comments. So we spent a lot of time working among ourselves to provide positive comments for you. In the time available for preparing these scoping comments, we focused primarily on two aspects of your charge: the restoration of the Delta ecosystem and providing reliable water supplies. However, because all of matters are interrelated, you will also find specific recommendations related to sustainable Delta agriculture, how to pay for restoration and water supply, other related recommendations for flood management, water storage, and governance. We are committed to working with the Council over the next year and beyond in further refining these recommendations as you progress in your iterative way with your plan. Our recommendations are already posted at ewccalifornia.org, and we appreciate that you will also be posting them. Barbara Berrigan-Perea will now touch on issues or recommendations related to Delta restoration and Delta's place.
And Mr. Minton, maybe Mr. Rockwell could be good enough to leave any extra copies on the table in the back. I know some people that aren't getting them now might want them during the break.
Thank you.
Okay.
Barbara?
Good evening. My name is Barbara Berrigan-Perea. I'm the Executive Director for Restore the Delta. My last name is spelled Barrilla. Today I'm here to speak for our organization, which has grown from 75 to over 7,000 members over the last 4 years. We're kind of a uniquely situated organization in that we really work in two areas. We have equal concern for ecosystem restoration for the Delta and for economic viability for Delta communities. Consequently, we are urging you to adapt and consider the recommendations made to you tonight in the document provided by the Environmental Water Caucus. This document comes very close to matching our dual goals of economic viability and economic restoration for the Delta. In particular, what I'd like to point out to you in the document, if you turn to the last page in the back.
Is this page 8?
Yes, page
Okay.
8. Policy recommendations on Delta conveyance facilities. We would like to point out that in point number 2, we are urging the Delta Stewardship Council to analyze capabilities of conveyance from the 3,000 CFS to 15,000 CFS, as well as alternatives that would utilize existing conveyance rather than constructing new conveyance as part of your plan. We also encourage you to analyze flow criteria set by the State Water Resources Control Board in 2010, or actually analyzed by the State Water Resources Control Board in 2010. And also, we're very happy with point number 4 about looking at cost analysis for conveyance, including a no new conveyance option. In addition, I'd like to turn your attention to page 2 inside the document, policy recommendations for physical habitat restoration. In particular, point number 4 carries a lot of weight for people in the Delta. The idea that rather than creating habitat plans from the top down, in which councils are drawing up plans with 40 to 100,000 acres being targeted for habitat restoration, that the Delta community must be full partners engaged in the creation, development, and implementation of any habitat restoration programs within the Delta. We have to be full partners at the table. In addition, we encourage the Delta Stewardship Council to consider the recommendation about incentivizing any sacrifices made by Delta landowners towards habitat restoration. Carrots instead of sticks make sense to us in the way a habitat conservation plan should be created. And we also want to urge the council to, as in point number 2, to recognize that in the Delta, we have habitat that is tied to agriculture that is worthy of protection, in addition to aquatic protection. In reviewing the documents that you've provided for review by the public, the thing that we found the least contained in those documents is what you refer to as Delta called place, but what we think of as Delta as home. In these scoping recommendations provided to you by the EWC, we think it actually addresses a good part of that deficit, and we believe that it offers a chance to really look at how to create sustainable agriculture. And when I talk about sustainable agriculture, we're talking about agriculture that protects the habitat and economic viability of the community. Next, Bill Jennings will be coming up, I believe, to talk on flows.
Okay, Mr. Jennings.
Good evening, Chairman Eisenberg, board members. Excuse me, Bill Jennings, Jennings. And Phil, I'll I've got a card in there subsequent to this for another group of organizations.
Another go-around?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd like to emphasize that the EIR must consider a range of alternatives for new conveyance facilities, including no conveyance and a full range of capacities from 3,000 to 15,000 CFS. I think failure to consider a full range of alternatives would doom the EIR out of the starting gate. Evaluation of alternative conveyance facilities must be consistent with the best available peer-reviewed science and include protective operational scenario based upon the State Water Board and the Department of Fish and Game's recently released Delta flow criteria. The EIR must clarify the meaning of water supply reliability in a world where rights to water exceed many times the unimpaired flow of the basin. Less reliance on the Delta cannot simply be a goal, it must be an acceptance of reality. Delta water quality must be protected, water quality statutes must be enforced, Diversion of water around this estuary will alter the fate and transport of contaminants in the estuary. It will increase residence time and pollutant concentration, and you can't solve California's water problems by further degrading this estuary. Proposed mitigation and habitat restoration must be realistic and achievable. Mitigation cannot be deferred. Financing must be assured. It must be implemented in collaboration with the Delta communities. Previous efforts to protect and restore this Delta are littered with broken promises, deferred and failed mitigation. I referred to the fish screens and the cow-fed rod and many other things. California cannot continue to manage its water like it does its budget. Water supply reliability cannot be achieved without bringing water use into balance with available supplies. The Delta cannot be restored without providing significantly greater flows. And our only viable option is to eliminate waste and to use and reuse water more efficiently. And now I'll turn it over to Mark Rockwell, Conservation Chair of the Federation of Fly Fishers, Northern California Council, who will discuss endangered species and environmental justice.
And I think this is the last presentation of the consolidated 30 organizations. Is that correct, Mr. Rockwell?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Could
you give
everybody else is stuck in the fog, I think.
Got it.
No.
If you could, for the record, name and organization, please.
I'm Mark Rockwell. I'm here on behalf of the Federation of Fly Fishers, Northern California Council here in California, as well as the Endangered Species Coalition, a national group of over 400 organizations that work on wildlife and habitat restoration issues for endangered species, and on behalf of the Environmental Justice Coalition for Water, who are here representing disadvantaged communities and tribes. So anyway, I want to say good evening and thank you very much for this opportunity to talk with you tonight. First of all, I want to talk about the endangered species issues on behalf of the Endangered Species Coalition. And endangered species issues, as I'm sure you know, have at times taken up center stage in much of the dialogue having to do with California water. And the Endangered Species Coalition has worked hard with all the other groups in this coalition to put forward recommendations to help the council, all of you, to evaluate and analyze what it's going to take to recover listed species. And among those many recommendations that are made in our document, I would like to just draw your attention to page 8, and under the policy recommendations on conveyance that Barbara alluded to as well, on the second bullet point. And I think, where we're talking about analyzing a full range of conveyance, we also want you to, in the process of doing that from small conveyance to large conveyance, and even you'll note in there that there's a possibility of no conveyance facility at all, but to also remember while you're doing that the State Water Resources Control Board's flow recommendations that were put forward at the end of last year. As Bill Jennings referred to, we also feel that increased flows through the Delta are key to the endangered species recovery, particularly for aquatic species. And then on page 8, under policy recommendations for the physical habitat restoration and item 2 there, we recommend significant habitat restoration will be required for both aquatic and terrestrial species. I think it's important to remember that, fish have seemed to have gotten most of the attention in all of this dialogue that's gone on. But I think, we also want to remember that vernal pool species, giant garter snake, those kinds of what we call terrestrial species are important. And the Central Valley, including the Delta, and particularly the Delta, is the largest wintering area in the United States for raptors. So it's a very important process to consider the terrestrial species in this process. So we encourage the council to include these recommendations that we're providing tonight in your EIR process for the Delta Plan. And on behalf of the Environmental Justice Coalition for Water, we want to also add that when making decisions on water resources, realize the widespread implications for disadvantaged communities and tribes. Some of these communities, particularly in the valley here, have high quality water flowing by them in surface flows, while they're dependent on water that comes from their associated wells that feed their homes, which are contaminated. And I think it's important that everybody in California, in the end, needs to have good, clean, healthy drinking water. And we want to make sure that that's part of a focus that occurs when you're talking about water resources here. And then also the Environmental Justice Coalition for Water wants to recommend that you review the Delta Vision stakeholders document, and particularly the environmental justice section there. And they feel that you can use this as a guide to help direct you and get you to focus in on some of the significant environmental justice issues that can be included in the Delta Plan. So we repeat, all of us, all 30 of us, our commitment to working with you as you move forward. We will be here through the process. We're not rigid, we're flexible. We want to work with all the stakeholders involved and particularly work towards a workable solution that is going to benefit all of Californians. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Also, thank you for putting this in writing. I know we just got it tonight. Haven't had a chance to read it in detail, but we will. That's very helpful. Supervisor Rostaller, there you are. Thank you very much for coming, Supervisor. San Joaquin Board of Supervisors, and your colleague, Mr. Vogel, is coming up in a minute or two, so thank you for coming here.
We give quick speeches. It's Larry Rustaller, R-U-H-S-T-A-L-L-E-R. Thank you very much. We appreciate you coming down. I didn't know you were as powerful as you were. We had clear day today, but this place is completely socked in. I don't know how you managed that, but
Don brought the fog with him.
I'm Larry Rustaller. I'm on the Board of Supervisors here in San Joaquin County. Ken Vogel, who is also with me, will speak right after I finish my very brief remarks. The Delta Plan is an ambitious effort and an important one. As we go about formulating the Delta Plan, we here in San Joaquin County hope that you keep in mind the three most important concerns of our county and the Delta. Flood protection and enhancement of our levee systems, adequate water supply for all beneficial uses, and protection and enhancement of our agricultural economy. Without meeting these concerns, the Delta Plan will fail. San Joaquin County, by its own efforts through the Delta Protection Commission, the Delta Conservancy, the Delta Counties Coalition, is committed to the legislative goals embodied in the 2009 Delta legislation, including the stated goals of regional self-sufficiency, reduced reliance on the Delta as a water source for regions outside the Delta. We are submitting to you tonight, for the record, some specific concerns and comments regarding the substance of the proposed Delta Plan as outlined in your December 10th Notice of Preparation. But we also want to, once again, point out that unless the Delta Plan recognizes and enforces the legislative promises made over the decades, the Delta Plan will not be credible. Those promises recognize areas of origin, water rights, the necessity of limiting exports of waters from the Delta to only those amounts which are truly surplus to the needs of the Delta, the common pool concept of the Delta waters, and the development of additional water supplies outside of the Delta to meet the needs of the people of the state of California. When considering the cost of implementing the Delta Plan itself must provide that public and private interest should contribute in proportion to the benefits received or negative impacts caused by the provisions of the Delta Plan. The plan must further provide for the need to mitigate the adverse impacts to local governments and must provide funding for this mitigation. Any fee mechanisms provided for the Delta Plan must be based on engineering studies and other relevant and validated studies showing the costs, benefits, impacts, etc. Furthermore, the process for developing a financing plan within the Delta Plan has to be an open, transparent, public. As our Delta County Coalitions has noted more than once to our state and federal legislators and administrative leaders, nothing should be done in the Delta which does not involve us in an honest, substantive, and open process. Nothing should be done in the Delta which harms us to benefit others. We trust that you understand the concerns we have and that we are prepared to work with you If you are prepared to work with us and honor all of these promises, we will have no problems. Thank you very much. Ken?
Supervisor, would either you or Supervisor Vogel just mention for folks who haven't heard about it, the alliance, Delta County Alliance or caucus that you've formed, because it's relatively new and it's an interesting development.
What happened several years ago is, as I am a member of the Delta Protection, as Don Natoli, from Contra Costa, it's Mary Pifo, who represents the Delta in the eastern side of Contra Costa and the western Delta. You have Mike Reagan from Solano, and Jim Provenza, and Mike McGowan from up in Yolo County. And there are those that will state that they've never seen 5 supervisors from 5 different counties ever be able to get along for 5 minutes, let alone for over 2 years. But we've seemed to be able to pull together. It's been an interesting ride so far, and I consider that we'll probably be together for the next several years as all of this comes together. We're committed that since the Delta is a whole, it doesn't make any sense that there are these political boundaries. That what happens in San Joaquin definitely takes into account what's happening up in Sacramento or to the west. It's been something that I've found probably one of the most rewarding parts of my first 4 years on the board, in that I've gotten to know a much bigger picture, and I think that will go a long way in helping not only with the Stewardship Council, but the Conservancy and the Delta Protection Commission. I think we all work together knowing that we're in this with other people, and you don't end up throwing your friend under the bus, is what I'm basically saying. We basically have found out that we either hang together or hang separately. Ken?
Supervisor Vogel, thank you very much for coming tonight, Supervisor.
Thank you. Our chairman was very eloquent. I'm Ken Vogel, V-O-G-E-L. I'm supervisor for the 4th District of San Joaquin County and a member of the Delta Conservancy. And Mr. Chairman and council members, I want to welcome you here to Stockton tonight. I hope that you can find your way home from here in the fog, but we have accommodations. We want to promote our local economy. And anyway, besides being a county supervisor, I'm also a farmer here in the county. I grow walnuts and cherries. Usually when it doesn't rain, the cherries do well, especially during harvest time. But as Supervisor Rushdaller noted, the primary concern San Joaquin County has regarding the Delta Plan have to do with protecting and enhancing our agricultural economy in and surrounding the Delta and maintaining the levee systems. Those levee systems in this county not only protect our agricultural economy, but also act as flood protection for our residents, not to mention the protection of much valuable public and private infrastructure. It is our agricultural economy, though, that I would speak to you about tonight. The Delta comprises 1/3 of San Joaquin County's total land. Approximately 87% of the primary Delta is devoted to agriculture. San Joaquin County makes up the largest portion of the Delta's agricultural land base at approximately 55%. Sacramento County follows with 20%. There are 254,000 plus acres of cropland in San Joaquin County's Delta, producing a farm value of $548 million. More than 70 plant and animal products are produced in San Joaquin County's Delta. San Joaquin County's Delta agriculture contributes $1.6 billion to the regional state economy using the DWR's formula for the circulation of value. That economy and the family way of life and the employment it represents makes possible is critically important to us. No plan, whether it is the Delta Plan, the Delta Conservation Plan, or any other plan, can be successful unless it recognizes, encourages, and protects that economy. Especially now in these tough economic times, with so many people seeking to hold on to their way of life, to get employment, to maintain their jobs, we should all be working to increase the economy and not do further damage. We know that the Delta is dynamic and that we in agriculture will have to adapt our agricultural practices to reflect change as time goes by. We cannot, however, be expected to give up our way of life in order that others outside of the Delta may continue their way of life. We have worked, all of us, whether we farm in the Delta, farmers in the Delta, residents in the Delta, and we would like to work with those who would cooperate with us, collaborate with us in pursuit of reasonable, cost-effective, peer-reviewed, science-based solutions to our common problems. These solutions would recognize the property and water rights we have and on which we have relied on and have built our lives around. These solutions would allocate the costs of these efforts to those receiving the benefits of the efforts and in proportion to the benefits received. Finally, we trust that you will listen to us and to the government entities such as the Delta Protection Commission, the Delta Conservancy, as you develop this Delta plan. We stand ready to work with you and our legislative representatives to craft a Delta plan that is fair, reasonable, and in the best interest of all involved. And thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
Supervisor, thank you very much. The next speaker, Robert Pike. Mr. Pike.
My name is Robert Pike, P-Y-K-E. I have two comments on the notice of preparation and the scope of the EIR, plus a comment about the necessity to prepare an EIR in the first place. I'm a civil engineer specializing in geotechnical earthquake water resources engineering, but as part of my PhD studies in civil engineering at the University of California, I also completed a minor in environmental planning under the guidance of Professor Robert Twiss. I've worked for almost 30 years on various problems in the Delta, starting with a forensic investigation of the 1982 flooding of McDonald Island, and I'm currently a member of the Board of Senior Consultants for the ongoing Reclamation District 17 levee improvements. I might also note that I was an expert witness for the plaintiffs in the now famous Paterno case, which confirmed the state's liability resulting from levee failures in cases where the state has been uneven in its performance. My first comment has to do with the improved water conveyance and storage element of the proposed Delta plan and the EIR. On November 15, I emailed the following comment on the then draft NOP to the Council. In view of the controversy surrounding BDCP, the likelihood that it will not come together in time for inclusion in the Delta plan, and the near certainty that it will not meet the statutory requirements for inclusion in the Delta plan, should not the first bullet, bottom of page 18 of the final draft NOP, which at that time read, prompt implementation of the BDCP program if the program complies with Water Code section 85.320, be rewritten as, this was my suggestion, prompt implementation of the BDCP if it complies with Water Code section 85.320, my addition, and or alternatives designed to accomplish improvements in water conveyance and storage consistent with the co-equal goals of the Delta Reform Act. This would allow for inclusion of the BDCP in the Delta plan should lightning strike. I can give you the probabilities, if you wish, of being struck by lightning, but would also allow for alternate plans for improved conveyance. Although my comment was posted on the Council website, apparently it was the collective wisdom of the Council, its staff and consultants, not to change the wording in the NOP. However, as it turns out, my comment was somewhat prophetic, as it has come to pass that BDCP will not be completed, even in draft form, before the end of this year, if then. In many ways, this is fortunate, because now, instead of the cart being before the horse is properly ahead of the cart, or at least the horse has an opportunity to get ahead of the cart. As suggested by Richard Roos Collins at the California Water Law Symposium on Saturday, the Delta Council now has the opportunity to set forth in the Delta Plan its own guidelines or rules for improved water conveyance and storage, and the BDCP, or its successor, will then be obliged to be consistent with those guidelines or rules. However, the NOP has no bullet to describe this task, and the Water Resources White Paper, as far as I can see, did not even address water conveyance through the Delta. Although there will be other important aspects of the Delta Plan, there is no aspect that is more important than this, because getting conveyance right is also the key to making a meaningful start on ecosystem restoration. In that respect, I would draw your attention to my recent op-ed in the Stockton Record. In that piece, I point out that there are two keys to meeting the co-equal goals of the Council. First is the need to recognize that man-made alteration of the delta in combination with larger export flows has turned the delta from an estuarine environment into a weedy lake which favors invasive species over native species. And the second is to recognize that precipitation in California is extremely variable and that past and future variability must be addressed in any sustainable water management plan. Thus, there are at least two principles that should be embodied in your guidelines or rules. One, that natural flows through the delta should be restored to the maximum practical extent. And two, that much more water should be extracted at periods of high flow, and much less or zero water should be extracted at periods of low flows. In my op-ed, I expanded on how these principles might be implemented. For now, I just note that additional south of delta storage would be required, either in groundwater banks or in surface storage facilities. However, the NOP does not address such storage facilities, but instead talks about completion of the CalFed surface storage program, which includes such dogs as the Temperance Flat Reservoir, which by DWR's own calculation would generate an annual yield of only 140,000 acre-feet for a capital cost of $3.36 billion, making it more costly than seawater desalination. That program has provided employment for the staff of BWR and the Bureau and their consultants for many years, but it has no place in the Delta Plan. Instead, the Delta Plan should be talking about possibly decommissioning of reservoirs on rivers upstream of the Delta and replacing them with south of Delta storage so that the water can flow through the Delta first. My second, much briefer comment on the NOP has to do with what I would call the flood management and levees element, which in the NOP is actually entitled Reduced Risk to People, Property, and State Interests. This element is generally more complete, and it includes both prioritization of investments and creation of a Delta-wide flood management and financing entity. However, it says nothing about the drafting of Delta-specific levy standards or a Delta levy policy, which is sorely needed. I have prepared an outline of what I think might be appropriate standards for Delta levies, and I'll submit them to the Council or publish them in the Stockton Record in due course. I would just note that one essential component of the Council's policy on levees should be a requirement to restore native vegetation on the water side of every mile of the Delta levees. I believe that there are ways that this can be done without compromising the integrity of the levees, and that the Council should join with Congressman John Garamendi and others to push back on the Corps of Engineers who want to enforce an inappropriate and ill-advised blanket policy on levee vegetation in every state of the nation. My third and final comment has to do with the need for an EIR. While I'm not a lawyer, let alone a specialist in environmental law, I find the arguments made by the State and Federal Contractors Water Agency, which is led by lawyers, and by others to be persuasive on this matter. They argue that even a programmatic EIR is not required for you to adopt and enforce the Delta Plan. I understand that as a state agency you are likely obliged to follow the advice of the Attorney General's Department on this matter, but I note that the Attorney General's Department is not always right. Witness the Paterno case. The reason that I raise this question is simply that you, your staff, and consultants have limited time and resources to develop the Delta Plan. And it would appear that sooner or later you are going to have to devote more effort to studying alternatives for conveyance, ecosystem restoration, flood management, and land use, and to developing a meaningful plan that integrates all of these elements, possibly at the expense of completing an EIR. And if that is true, you had best address this issue sooner rather than later. An EIR for a plan that has no real content is like a suit of armor with no one inside it. Thank you for your patience.
Mr. Pike, we've heard some of those comments in previous submissions you've given to it, but if you've got that summary in writing, if you could email it to us, we'd post it on the website soon, and that would be very helpful.
I will email it this evening.
Thank you very much. Mr. Mike Robinson. Mr. Robinson?
Thank you. My name is Mike Robinson, R-O-B-I-N-S-O-N. Thank you for the opportunity to comment. It appears that the co-equal goals are opposing forces. There's a grab for water in both directions. And the question begs itself, where is agriculture in this co-equal goals thing? Agriculture is the mainstay of the Delta. There are several questions that arise and have been there for many years that have never been answered. The first one is, how much water is really needed for the Delta, for the ecosystem, for the ecology, for the Delta itself? And how much water is available then for export? Initially, the studies determined in the 1960s that there was about 4.5 to 5 million acre feet of water available for export. That's when the projects were designed and sold to the Delta as being something that needed to be done. Those studies, that science also determined that by 1980, more water would be needed into the Delta because exports were expected to increase. That they proposed that the 5 million acre feet of North Coast River water would be brought into the Delta, but the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act stopped that, and no water came to the Delta to replace exports. However, the exports continued to increase after that with no replacement. So it appears that there is a serious overdrafting of the available water that the Delta can provide, and that this is overdrafting the resource. A solution is that the periods of high water flow can be utilized if there is more on-system storage south of the Delta. The question I always ask is, how can the taking of up to 15 million acre feet of water from the Delta improve the Delta? It's always been said that the alternative conveyance will improve the water quality in the Delta. My question is how? How do you answer that question? That is a conveyance, over, through, around, under the Delta. You're taking up to 15 million acre feet of Sacramento River water, which is seriously needed for water quality within the Delta, and bypassing the Delta merely for exports. There are plans out there that can really improve the quality of water in the Delta, one of those being the Delta Corridors Plan or versions of that plan that, in my opinion, would really do benefit for the Delta, have benefits for the Delta without really the need for an alternative conveyance. Another question needs to be asked, and that is to explore the no conveyance alternative and how cost effective would it be to decommission, take out of service, say 1 million acres of already salt impaired agricultural area that is now being served by the Delta waters. Those waters, they've already retired a couple 100,000 acres or more. What would be the effect and the savings of water and monetary savings by just retiring more of that land? The Delta should not be expected to provide all the water for California or too much water for California. Other sources of water need to be explored. Thank you very much.
Sir, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Mr. Jack Michael. Mr. Michael.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the council. My name is Jack Michael, M-I-C-H-A-E-L. I'm Vice President North of Recreational Boaters of California. You've heard from other members of our board at other meetings, but we figure maybe the more often we say it, the easier it'll be for you to hear. Basically, our concern is really follows what was in your notice of preparation, that Section 85203 of the Water Code provides that longstanding constitutional principles of reasonable use and the public trust doctrine shall be the foundation of state water management policy and are particularly important and applicable to the Delta. The public use doctrine provides access to all navigable waters available, and that is provided in the federal Constitution and law. We're concerned as recreational boaters that we be assured that there is continued access to these navigable waters, and we've provided our written position, but that the access has to be sustained, that boating access to Delta waterways be retained, and that the mitigation for any physical barriers such as gates that may be placed across any existing Delta waterways include boat locks that are constructed, maintained, and operated at no cost to recreational boaters. That is our primary concern, and we hope that you'll take that into consideration. Thank you.
Sir, thank you very much. Mr. Kevin Graves. Mr. Graves?
Good evening. My name is Kevin Graves, and I am the president of the board of directors of the town of Discovery Bay. We are the single largest residential community located directly on the Delta. We reside in East Contra Costa County. 100,000 of the 700,000 acres of the Delta is also in East Contra Costa County, but we're not all that far into East Contra Costa County. You go about a half mile past my house and you're in San Joaquin County, so we appreciate your comments. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for representing that. We are concurrent. We believe that a concurrent planning effort a concurrent planning effort to acknowledge in this NOP would be the Delta Conservancy Strategic Plan, which is being prepared by the Delta Conservancy. The town of Discovery Bay and Contra Costa County support much of the content of the notice of preparation and has the following suggestions to improve upon the environmental review process. Consider the Delta Conservancy Strategic Plan and the East Bay Municipal Park District's Master Plan. Both plans will affect future changes in the Delta. The Park District in particular identifies significant facility expansion within the Delta over the long term. Examine the impacts of debris in the Delta and consider strategies that will remove this debris. There's many old boats, decaying types of debris out there that's causing contamination within the Delta. Identify and evaluate potential conflicts between the Delta Plan and local general plans. The development and conservation of resources within the Delta is currently governed by the local general plans, which for many years have been required by law to comply with the Delta Protection Commission's Land Use and Resource Management Plan. The Delta Plan will now supersede both the Resource Management Plan and local general plans. This can be particularly significant for strategies aimed on improved water conveyance or expanded habitat areas. The EIR should identify areas of conflict, the potential adverse effects of such conflicts, and now I'm in real trouble. That was real funny, whoever did that.
That was a call for energy conservation, I assume.
Yes. Nobody else got the lights turned off on them. I haven't been up here that long. Maybe it had to do with residential, I'm not sure. It has been a lot of agricultural up here. The EIR should identify areas of conflict, the potential adverse effects of such conflicts, and propose mitigation measures if appropriate. Identify and measure environmental benefits of the Delta Plan. An effective Delta Plan has the potential to produce many environmental benefits, such as improved safety from strategic Delta levee investments or improved water quality from an accelerated program to reduce sources of chemicals in our water supply that adversely affect plant and animal life in the Delta. The EIR should identify and quantify such environmental benefits. Consider agricultural water requirements that would be more stringent than the agricultural water use requirements in SBX 7-7. The NOP indicates that the Council will consider urban water conservation requirements that would be more stringent than urban use targets under SBX 7-7. A similar alternative strategy is needed for agricultural water use. Agricultural uses most of the water exported from the Delta and has the potential to play a significant role in reducing the reliance on the Delta in meeting the state's water supply needs. Examine the following alternative strategies for achieving sustainable water use. Water transfers from agricultural to urban uses. Retirement of agricultural land that is junior water rights or has soil that generates polluted runoff when irrigated. Modifications that state and federal agencies should consider for long-term water contract renewals. Examine strategies to improve enforcement of existing water pollution control laws. Evaluate the impacts of meeting existing long-term water contracts for the State Water Project and Central Valley Project. Such an evaluation would help bookend a broad range of alternatives for achieving the co-equal goals. The outcome of this evaluation should also be compared to the water diversions possible under the ecosystem-related flow recommendations prepared by the State Water Resources Control Board and the Department of Fish and Game in accordance with requirements in the Delta Reform Act. Ensure that the data used in the Delta Plan is factually accurate and objective. The Delta Reform Act acknowledges the importance of science in developing the Bay Delta Conservation Plan by mandating that the Delta Independent Science Board review the EIR for the BDCP and submit comments. The white papers recently prepared by the Delta Stewardship Council rely heavily on studies conducted by others. Many of these studies, for a number of reasons, contain biases or inaccuracies. The Delta Stewardship Council should use the Delta Independent Science Board to review the administrative draft of the EIR for the Delta Plan to ensure that its supporting studies are accurate and objective, or that the limitations of such studies are fully disclosed in the EIR. I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Just as a note, much of the review process on the Delta Plan will go to the Independent Science Board by law. Yeah, okay. John Herrick. John, there you are. General Counsel of the South Delta Water Agency. Good to see you, John.
Thank you very much. As introduced, I'm John Herrick, Herrick, representing South Delta Water Agency. Mr. Chairman and board members, I do thank you for the opportunity. I'd just like to recognize and agree with the comments of our environmental friends and, of course, our supervisors and many of the other commenters tonight. It's a daunting task you have in front of you. If we were going to rewrite the law, we would make some significant changes, but you're faced with these issues. Rather than repeat some stuff that's already been said, I'd like to focus on just a couple issues that I think the EIR has to cover. And the first is, as was touched on by Mike Robinson, I think it's a precursor to any evaluation of the Delta for the creation of a Delta plan is the analysis of the yield of the system. So we first have to determine under what circumstances how much water is produced. And then we have to allocate that supply, I think, according to existing laws and standards, which is how much is needed for the environment, which is a very difficult decision. But secondly, how much is needed for area of origin needs. I think it's clear, but we'll test that eventually, but I think it's clear that the promises originally made when the projects were developed were that absent additional supply, the areas of origin would be able to recover or get water back from the projects to protect those areas so that their future wasn't mortgaged in order to produce them. I do get cut off quite often.
I don't know.
So.
I wouldn't turn out the lights on John Herrick if I were in control of them, I'll tell you that.
I'm not armed. Those days are behind me.
I suspect they may be on some kind of timers. We'll have to have somebody keep an eye on the switch back there.
It's our egg commissioner, apparently. Anyway, secondly, and I know this is a difficult issue, but I think part of the analysis also has to include some sort of consideration for mitigation of effects. And by that I mean, if we need to restore some function or some area or some fishery or something, we can't just say, in order to improve the Delta, everybody should share in that. I think we have to say, if this person, caused this problem, then they should mitigate that. And again, that becomes very argumentative and difficult, but the principle is very clear. We wouldn't tell any particular farmer, go clean up that portion of the river that someone else dumped PCBs in. I mean, you would say, who did that? Make them mitigate that, not someone else. So I think that has to be part of the approach. Whether you can fully do that in the plan, I think that has to be part of it. Now, to get to certain specifics, you unfortunately are going to include analysis of alternate conveyance mechanisms or facilities, and I understand that. But I would like to encourage you to take special attention to not just the effects on flows in different areas, but specifically in the South Delta. Under current hydrology and hydraulics, most of the San Joaquin River coming down in summertime, the San Joaquin River flow in summertimes is insufficient to reach the bay. It goes into the South Delta, and some of it is exported, some of it is used by local water users. But the salt doesn't go anywhere except through the export pumps. Now, in higher flow years, salt is moved out at different times. But that becomes very key when you analyze an alternative conveyance facility that will decrease exports from that area. That means you will necessarily remove less salt from the area during summer times or during irrigation season. And that has been sloughed over, in my opinion, in the BDCP process. They try to use averages, which includes high flow years and everything, but it's a simple salt in, salt out. And if you analyze a 10,000 CFS tunnel or something, you will then necessarily be removing less salt from the area. And that does mean it collects there and will salt up. Now, from our perspective, that's important, but I think the statutes that govern you to do it also require you to take pay attention to that, in that, you're also supposed to protect, maintain, and where possible, enhance, various things, including agriculture. So I guess by that I mean the analysis needs to be very specific on those effects. So one may conclude that different conveyance facilities may help reliability of water, but if at the same time it specifically and significantly adversely affects the delta, then I don't think you could go down that road. Real briefly, I'm sorry if I'm taking too much time, but and the last thing I want to say is there are numerous governing statutes, regulations, which whether or not you can specifically address, I think they need to be recognized. We've got federal law requiring the doubling of some species. We've got regulations for water quality. We've got regulations to decrease the use of some source of water. And whether or not those would be adopted today, they're on the books. So when you figure out or try to figure out what to do, those need to be taken into consideration. And I'll end it with that. Again, I want to join in all the wonderful comments so far. I feel like the kid who was put in after the game was already won.
John, before you get away, you've raised a bunch of points, and I want to encourage you, because you are uniquely positioned to do some of this. Could you give some thought to putting in writing the major elements of what you've just said? First, on the whole question of flow, which is water supply, what's really available, and how to deal with that vis-a-vis all the competing demands and the existing laws, which seem to promise, some people say, everything to everyone. That would be helpful to see what you think about how we could cobble our way through that. And then likewise, in the other sections of your comment, there are a bunch of things that you, if you're willing, you could elaborate for us, and it would be extraordinarily useful in the next few weeks to get some of those letters around so we can start thinking about the specifics of how to approach those issues.
Absolutely, and you don't have them yet only because of my horrible schedule and my lazy attitude.
And they're not easy to...
You will get those.
Thank you very much. Okay. Mr. Tony Silva, Jr. Mr. Silva?
Thank you very much. My name is Tony Silva, Jr. That's S-I-L-V-A. And a little bit about myself. I'm a little farmer here locally, and I've been here 54 years, my entire life. I like to think I'm representing the taxpayers of the community. It's a shot. I'm going to have to read this because I'm not a real good public speaker. This is just to give you a little background on our friends down there in Southern California who want our water. their history with the Owens Valley, which is once was an enormous lake surrounded by wildlife, is now predominantly alkali flat. In other words, it's just a wasteland. They sucked all the Owens River water out of it before it gets there. It says out of the water drafted from the Owens River supplies the LA Aqueduct, which is 223 miles long, and that was completed in 1913, which is a long time ago. And the second aqueduct was built and completed in 1970. I said, well, today the southern Owens River Valley is plagued with alkali dust storms. In fact, they even wrote a couple books on this. The death of the Owens Valley, which is contributed to drawing water from the Owens River. Now, the Colorado River is another river that they draw from down here in Southern California, and they take between 4.7 and 5.5 million acre feet a year out of those rivers every year. That's each and every year. So the water is said to supply 27 million people, which is 40% with 40% of the water. Scripps Institution of Oceanography, which is a premier institution, stated or reported there is a 50% chance that Lake Mead, which is supplied by the Colorado River, will be dry by the year 2001 or 2021. I said, well, that doesn't mean much to me, or maybe all you people out there, but you better start thinking about that's the largest reservoir in the United States, completely dry from all the water they're sucking out of it. Okay? Moving on to the Delta, which includes the San Joaquin River and the Sacramento River, supplies the Delta-Mendota Canal, which was built in 1951. This canal delivers water to Southern California via a 300-mile canal at the tune of 2.7 million acre feet per year. Now, I think that's a low estimate. That's probably, I think, a 2006 estimate. I'm not quite sure, but listening to what other people are saying, that's a low estimate, 2.7 million acre feet out there. So I wish I had those numbers right, but I'm not quite sure about them. And they want more water. I myself see a trend here. They ruined the entire Owens Valley, that's LA, Southern California. Oh boy, I knew I was going to do this. They ruined the Owens Valley. If you don't believe it, the next time you're driving down Highway 395 and you pass through Bishop, Lone Pine, Independence, or Big Pine, California, tell me you're from Los Angeles. Good luck if you do. They also ruined the Colorado River. The next time you pass through Laughlin, take a look at the pond that once was a mighty raging river. So just for the records, an acre foot, I believe, or one acre foot is like a plot of land 260 by 260 feet, 1 feet underwater. That's a lot of water, especially when you start talking millions. I said, stop this water grab before the Delta turns into the Owens Valley or the creek known as the Colorado River. Southern California, you built in the desert, you live in the desert, and it's time that you get your water from the ocean. Imagine that, getting the water that's sitting right in front of you. If you desalinate the ocean water, you won't ruin the Delta like you ruined the Owens Valley and the Colorado River. In 1961, Freeport, Texas opened a desalination plant. This plant produced 1 billion gallons of water a day. At that very plant opening, a speech was given by a very popular president. This president, name was John F. Kennedy, and this is what he had to say on that day. No water resource program is of greater long-range importance than our oceans, and to water fit for our homes and industries. Such a breakthrough would end a bitter struggles between neighbors, states, and nation. How can one man have so much insight to an important resource 50 years ago, and not one of you experts can even mention desalination? Not one. It's all about taking our water, nothing about taking the water that they got in the ocean. San Diego itself is, right now, it's in the process of building a desalination plant for $328 million that will supply 10% of its fresh water use. There's a noble idea. I've been to about a half a dozen of these meetings throughout the valley, and it's always been the same old thing. Pass out as many fancy maps and color charts, and don't bring up desalination. So I have been out in the Delta for over 50 years. I can say The condition of the Delta has deteriorated so much that each and every one of in this room should be ashamed. The price tag that I got from, at one of the meetings, I confronted the guy, got it from him. This is not something I'm arbitrarily picking out of the air. The price tag of this whole project, the canal, is $50 billion after said and done. Say what you want. You can argue with the numbers. That's what he said. About one more minute here. I'm sorry. Anyway, it's time. It's at this time the state is what, $26 billion in a red. That's not good. I said we're right now where the state is furloughing workers. Workers are taking pay cuts. State workers are losing their jobs. We're at probably 10%. Stockton, a lot worse. Unemployment. Last year, our governor, Arnold Schwarzenegger, released 28,000 prisoners out of jail that were incarcerated. Right now, he's being sued, one of them having to murder somebody while they're out. Bad choice, just to save money. My question is, who's going to pay for this? How are you going to pay for this? And what your plans are when that salt water comes up from the ocean and comes down to downtown Stockton, gets in our drinking water, and it leaches down to our water table. Who's going to pay for that? And I want to close with this, but it's something that is not personal, but I'm just going to say this as you get dressed tomorrow morning. Here's what I'd like you to think, but it's not personal, it's just something you would think. As you're putting on your slacks and your pants and tightening your ties and put your coat on and combing your hair, just remember this. If you put lipstick on a pig in the morning, that evening you have a pig with lipstick. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Silver. Dante Namalini. Dante? Oh, Junior. Where's the old man?
We got the second string tonight.
No. This is the fresh young blood.
Dante Namalini Jr., that's Nomellini. On behalf of the Central Delta Water Agency, excellent points by Mr. Silva and others. The Owens Valley that hits it on the head. That's, I believe, is going to happen. But first of all, this is an overwhelming task, as you guys realize. Looking over the notice of preparation, the sheer scope of this, I thought was overwhelming. It's going to be overwhelming for us to try and comment on everything and for you to process it. But whoever came up with the January 1st, 2012 is not thinking straight. But I really appreciate you guys coming here and hearing the people. That means a lot. I have no faith whatsoever in the BDCP. It's being run by the exporters. But I am comforted in this process. I have some hope. As was mentioned earlier, one of the things that we in the Delta have been chanting for a long time is somebody find out how much water is truly surplus. When these projects came online, there were promises, and my father has got pages and pages of people quoting, saying, don't worry, we're only going to take what's surplus. Well, nobody has done it, and you folks, I think, are our only chance for somebody to do it. I mean, it's part of your charge here to deal with reliable water, and you're right, this is just a joke as far as interpretation, but reliability, that's what we're talking about. How much water is available to export? You know, how much is needed for the watershed? So the first and foremost task you guys should do, we would recommend, is embark on a plan to get those figures and see how much we could export out of the system reliably in light of climate change and whatnot. Very important, and I think you're the only folks that are in a position to do it, so I would really hope you do that. And then I just wanted to comment on, of course, the isolated facility. I was also pleased when I read the documents that your charge basically says you're supposed to protect the Delta. I had the mentality this is just like the BDCP. It's really designed to destroy the Delta. But when I read through the stuff, you really have to protect it. I don't think you could destroy it. And by destroy it, I mean turn it into an inland sea, let all the levees go, let the salt water come in, and turn it into a salt sea. That's what I mean by destroying it. But when I read your charge, you have to protect it. And the point I'd like to make, and I don't see this raised all the time, but when it comes to the isolated facility, what always struck me why it's such a horrible idea is because it destroys this common pool concept. Right now, we've got about 25 million people, the number grows, who are depending on the water quality in the Delta. And we have, I heard 2 million, let's say millions of acres of farmland that depend on the water quality in the Delta. You give them that diversion point at the top of the Delta, they no longer have a vested interest. They no longer care about the water quality in the Delta. I think it's just a common sense, very practical line of thinking, if you want to protect the Delta, which I believe you have to do, you need to maintain water quality. You don't want to let 25 million people no longer have an interest in that water quality. This is as far as coming up with a way, how do we make sure the Delta really is protected? How do we make sure? Well, one of the ways is make sure as many people as possible have a stake in that water quality. So I believe to the bottom of my heart, when they create an isolated facility, the Delta's gone. Because now, like I mentioned, 25 million people, 2 million of acres, they don't care about the water quality. They don't care about the levees. It's going to be against their interest from that point to let water pass their diversion point. I think that would be horrible. And the other thing I'd like to mention is, CalFed seemed to do what you guys are trying to do. It's very similar. But they gave them more time to do it. You guys have to rush this process. But CalFed said the isolated facility is too controversial. There's no support for it, so we're not going to do it. But they said they're going to put it off the table, and they put it off the table for 7 years. And what they said is, for the next 7 years, we're going to study the through delta, see if we can make it work. Well, that wasn't fair because the plan was to substantially rehabilitate levees as part of the CalFed first 7 years. The plan was also to build state-of-the-art fish screens on the export pumps. Neither of those happened. Not only that, but they exported record amounts of water during that period. So sure enough, after 7 years come, they say the through delta didn't work. The fish are dying. We've got Judge Wanger telling us we can't do it. The levees are unstable. It was really unfair. So what I would ask you guys to do, what you should do, in my opinion, is really put the canal off the table for a long time. I would say 50 years, because if sea level is going to rise 20 feet, maybe something has to happen. So you don't have to say you'll never consider it, but you have to put it farther enough off the table so that people actually have an incentive to make through delta work. Because I knew this was going to happen. If you tell the exporters, we'll reconsider the canal in 7 years, then it's against their interest to make the through delta work. Sure enough, the fish screens didn't come online. Investments in levees didn't happen. Why? Because they want the isolated facility. So it was against their interest. So in your alternative that looks at no isolated facility, we need to keep that off the table long enough so everybody can meaningfully make the system work. Because if everybody has a stake in the Delta and they're not going to get a canal, not even be considered for 50 years, I guarantee you we'll make the system work. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nomalini. Mr. Crothers. Mr. Crothers? Yes, sir.
George Crothers, Crothers, from Roberts Island. Question for Mr. Eisenberg. It's a little booklet, page 23. Definitions of co-equal goals, number 85054. And goes along, shall be achieved in a manner that protects and enhances unique cultural, recreational, natural resources, and agricultural values in the Delta, etc. You mentioned that this phrasing, I believe you said, was deeply contentious. By that, did you mean that there are factions who would have preferred that agriculture not be considered in this?
During the legislative debates, there were voices that suggested only water supply for export was the primary goal of the state of California. There were other voices that said, no, only the Delta ecosystem is of primary interest to the state of California. There were voices that said all Delta residents should have a veto power over both. There were voices that said they shouldn't. This was cobbled out by the governor and the legislature, and it was contentious.
It appears it's going to take several hours to read this little pamphlet and several more hours to read between the lines.
All statutes are very much like that. Thank you very much, Mr. Crothers. Excuse me. Hold on, let me make sure I've got the, oh, yes. Miss Luddy, Miss Jessica Luddy.
Hi, my name is Jessica Ludy, L-U-D-Y, and I work with American Rivers, which, not the American River, but American Rivers is a national organization whose mission it is to restore and protect rivers for the benefit of human and natural communities. I have 2 brief points which address objectives C and G on page 8, so restoring the Delta ecosystem and reducing risks to
Hold on,
people.
let us get to page 8 so we can be sure. This is on the notice of preparation.
Yes.
Page 8, sub G. Okay.
And E. The first is that we can't solve the Delta ecosystem problem without restoring floodplain habitat and restoring floodplains. And similarly, we can't substantially reduce flood risk in the Delta without giving rivers more room to accommodate floods. So, as such, it's important to consider that some land use decisions can limit our ability to both restore floodplains and reduce flood risk. The other point is that under the National Flood Insurance Program, lands behind 100-year certified levees are not subject to the requirements of the flood insurance program. So you're not required to purchase flood insurance, elevate your house, mitigate flood risk, etc., nor are you necessarily aware of the residual risk from floods larger than the 100-year flood, which over the course of 30 years is 26%. There was a University of California, Berkeley study which sent out surveys to residents in the Delta living behind 100-year levees that suggested they were not aware of the residual risk from larger floods. So it's just important to consider with land use decisions, if we permit development behind levees in floodplains, that those we are exposing to risk may not be aware of the risk. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Roger Kelly. Mr. Kelly?
Roger Kelly, R-O-G-E-R-K-E-L-L-Y. I represent the Sea Ray Boat Club of Northern California, and I'm a lifetime resident of Stockton who lives along the Calaveras River, and I'm also one of the 7,500 members of Restore the Delta. I have a few concerns. She just brought up flood insurance. How'd you like to shell out a couple grand this year for flood insurance? That's what I've got to do this year, and I'm sure it's going to go up next year because it always goes up. And so I'm really concerned about the levees being repaired to an adequate system so that I won't be gouged with these huge insurance premiums. The other thing is, living right behind the Calaveras, I go out there every evening and I look at what's going on. And I watch the fish population. I watch my neighbor fishing from his kayak. I see that most of the fish he's getting are undersized. A lot of them aren't healthy. And with that, the food chain changes up. And now all of a sudden I've got sea lions and seals in my backyard desecrating the low amount of fish in the river. We just can't, we have to restore the Delta. You know, I'm concerned that overpumping the Delta, there's a lot of areas in the Delta that are so weeded in, we can't even enjoy them. And the flows are down so low. Please do not consider conveyance. Don't destroy the most beautiful freshwater estuary in the world. We can't afford conveyance.
Thank you, sir. Katie Patterson. Ms. Patterson, good to see you again. You joined us in Merced, what, was it 3 days ago, 2 days ago?
It's all a blur. It's Katie Patterson, P-A-T-T-E-R-S-O-N, and it's quite a smaller crowd over in Merced, so apparently they don't have the same concerns that we share here. I think that my job has been made really easy this evening by a lot of the advocates in this room who have spoken on behalf of agriculture. So I'm not going to really delve too much into San Joaquin Farm Bureau and our 4,200 members and, you know, the agricultural needs. And
But you did promise to give us an issue paper in detail at the Merced meeting, which we look forward to because we want to post that on the web and
yes,
review it.
Absolutely, and I know that's been also promised to you by other members of our Delta Caucus. We too share a Farm Bureau Delta Caucus, which many in the room may not be aware of, but the county governments also do have that. What I want to talk about is some items that are a little bit different and off the NOP this evening. And I want to characterize the Delta in a way that's a little bit different. There is a much smaller population there, and I think that that population shouldn't be discounted for the power and the needs that they have out in the Delta, just because that they may not have an equal vote that's out there. So we have to make sure that we're weighing those considerations that affect these regions equally. The other reason I'm here is to make sure that you, as you take on, and not personally, but as a group and a council, that you take on this EIR, that you don't take steps to evolve us out of agriculture. Because we talk about an evolving Delta in that community, but let's not make this to where, you know, we say that we're going to protect it, but that's an evolving plan that it's not going to be sustainable in the future. We need to make sure that the plans and the measures we take are to make that sustainable in the future. We also need to, you know, continue to focus on those regional plans. I think that that was trumped up quite a bit this evening, and we would also be in support of that. And I want to talk a little bit about the BDCP and the flow analysis and the multiple processes going on. They're quite overwhelming, and I think that by out of necessity, that's why you have the Delta Caucus Farm Bureaus. That's why you have the Delta Caucus in county councils. And that's why you have so many people here that are relying on these different organizations here, because it is just an overwhelming task to keep up with the list and the laundry list that's listed in the NOP. And I think that as you start to consolidate and as you start to characterize some of these processes, that you may pull them together in a better, more coordinated fashion that makes it a little bit easier, if that's possible, for us all to keep on board with that. And lastly, as you talk about this increasing reliance, we're setting down this path that we're looking to increase reliance on Delta waters, but we're also increasing the dependence on the Delta as well as we take those steps and measures. So as we look at a very myopic view of, you know, conveyance, I think that Dante Nomalini had it right on the head, that we put that conveyance part just off to the side here and really look at what are these other things that these regional factions, you know, and communities can be doing, whether it's this desal, whether it's, you know, on-site storage to take more flood flows. We have to be doing things that we can do now and sooner, because I don't see a lot of opposition to projects like that as you would get to the conveyance facility in such a mass outpouring, and that those may be
Ms.
more
Patterson, I can't help
beneficial.
it. I'm an old guy. I have never seen a universally popular water project in 50 years of active life in the field. Somebody's always mad about something.
You know, that is the nature of it, and I will have to learn that as I get a little bit older throughout the process. But those are my comments for this evening. We will be submitting those in written form through the Delta Caucus and probably through the San Joaquin Farm Bureau, and I know that the California Farm Bureau will be commenting as well.
And thank you for coming for 2 of these meetings. We appreciate it a great deal.
Thank you.
Ms. Deidre Desjardins, did I get that even close to the way it should be pronounced? Probably not. Well, my French is primitive, non-existent.
Yeah.
Anyway, if you'd correct me, please.
Yeah, it's Deirdre Desjardins, D-E-S space capital J-A-R-D-I-N-S. And I'm here to comment about page 25, greenhouse of the notice of preparation, greenhouse gas emissions and carbon sequestration. We're proposing is a substantial change in operations of the State Water Project, which currently consumes between 5,000 and 10,000 gigawatt hours of electricity per year. And that's from the most recent, the 2010 annual report. And The current mix of electricity is hydropower, geothermal, and coal-fired power plants. And to the extent that we increase exports, another million acre feet a year, which takes between 1 and 3.2 megawatt hours of electricity to ship down south, depending upon whether it goes over the Tehachapi's or not, will be another 1,000 to 3,200 gigawatt hours of electricity. And to the extent that we're getting that from fossil fuel-powered power plants, it's a substantial increase in greenhouse gas emissions, and I believe it should be analyzed under AB 32. In addition, I believe it should be analyzed under AB 32. Also, in addition, there's currently a north to south transfer project, and they're putting water into the Sacramento River that may come from rice growers who will be substituting groundwater pumping. And groundwater pumping also takes a lot of electricity. So, to the extent that we're looking at large-scale transfers into the river that will then be transferred far south, we really need to look at, where the increased energy is going to come from. And also with respect to reducing risks, to the extent that we become dependent upon fossil fuel-based power plants to pump water that is used for essential uses, we need to look at both price increase. We're expecting a 50% increase in electricity over the next 20 years alone, and we're increasing risk for geopolitical instability and interrupting our water supply. And I believe that if you look at these, that conservation measures it becomes obvious that those as the primary method of dealing with water supply issues are in the best interests of the state.
Thank you very much. Before we circle back around, Mr. Jennings is reserved his space. Don't stand up yet, Bill. I just wanted to say something. Yesterday, Don and I were in Sacramento in the morning for a session where all the water hotshot lawyers statewide and interest groups and lobbyists showed up, about 70 or 80 people, and almost no one said anything. And you just look at them, and these are people we deal with all the time. They're always at the council meeting. They're at all meetings. And it was kind of interesting because they always have something to say. Why didn't they say something? Well, because they're waiting for us to come out with our first draft so they can blast the things they don't like. And then we had the meeting in Concord the night before, and then we came down to Clarksburg where no opinion is left unstated. And then we come here, and you have generously given your time, given your opinions, not trying the old dodge of, we're going to let you lay yourself out and then kill you. And it is really refreshing. And I understand you got deeply held positions, and I respect them immensely, but I respect particularly that you're willing to talk to us about it and do it directly and with knowledge and care. It's very important. The kind of tactical holding back that all the pros do doesn't help much. It certainly doesn't help us in studying the issues. It may be okay for their litigation planning, but it's not good for much of anything else. So thank you very much for doing that. Other people, I'm going to call on people just generally, but if you have a blue form, ship them up. I'll take them in the order you get them. Yeah, please. And also the staff in back have more blue forms back there if you're closer. Mr. Jennings, we're circled around to you for the second time. Bill Jennings.
Thank you, Phil. Bill Jennings, California Sport Fishing Protection Alliance. I'm also speaking here on behalf of the California Water Impact Network and the Center for Biological Diversity. And this is a specific thing regarding the Monterey Plus amendments. And we believe that the EIR needs to to examine. We believe that certainly the repeal of these amendments. It was the elimination of the urban preference, the expansion of so-called surplus water, and the privatization of the Kern Water Bank that precipitated the recent crash of pelagic and salmoniid species in this estuary. Frankly, water supply reliability cannot mean that Kern County, representing a fraction of 1% of the state's population and economy, can be reliably assured of the same quantity of water from the Delta that has provided the South Coast with half the state's population and economy. The urban preference should be restored. Second, elimination of the requirement that Table A allocations in state water project contracts must conform to safe yield was absurd. I mean, Table A allocations were predicated on a full build-out export delivery scheme that can never occur. Article 18B should be reinserted into the state water contracts. and third, the illegal privatization of the Kern Water Bank opened the doors to a smoke and mirrors manipulation of the entire water system, and this bank should be returned to public control under public scrutiny. And again, I mean, the repeal of the Monterey Plus amendments should be analyzed in the EIR, considered in the Delta plan. I mean, obviously, we've got a lawsuit against it. Central and South Delta are our co-plaintiffs. Lastly, I'd like to briefly touch on the elephant in the room, and we'll be submitting extensive technical comments by this Friday on the EIR. But you know, the average unimpaired flow into this estuary, the 80-year median is 29 million acre feet. And the state board's identified 345 million acre feet of water rights. Not all of those are consumptive rights. I mean, they're power rights, about a third of them. But you know, the 1927 state filings are 60 million acre feet of consumptive rights. The amount of water in the State Water Project and the Central Valley Project that haven't been put to beneficial use, the consumptive use, is almost 20 million acre feet. I mean, we've got they're petitioning for an time extension on putting that to beneficial use. We've got a protest on that. That 345 million acre feet of water rights doesn't include all of the senior, riparian, the pre-14 rights. It certainly doesn't consider the amount of water that's required for the protection of this estuary for fish and wildlife and the protection of beneficial uses. You know, and hearing last week before the state board over an evidentiary hearing over an application to take another 45,000 acre feet, a new water right. At some point, we've got to understand that the inn is full, and that we, you know, the no vacancy sign has to be turned on. You can't, until we bring the water we've promised and are using into balance with what in fact we have, we cannot solve California's water problem or restore this estuary. And if that's an elephant, let me talk about a red herring real quick. We all know the doom and gloom scenarios propounded by Dr. Doom, and I would just suggest that yes, the Delta Islands are going to fail. They always have, and they've been reclaimed. They're not perhaps quite as fragile as certainly to the engineers that work on them as some of the academicians would have us to believe. But I would encourage you to do a simple mass balance. What happens if this worst case scenario comes to pass? How long is the water supply to Southern California affected? I mean, when Jones Tract went under, it was but a couple of days. When would equilibrium be reestablished? If the catastrophe, the earthquake occurred in December, probably there would be virtually no significant interruption. You know, is there sufficient storage south of Delta to get people over a crisis, until we can repair the levees? Are there measures that could be undertaken to ensure that a catastrophe wouldn't be as serious as it might be? I mean, these are things that are going to have to be considered. And the last thing I'll leave you with is in considering water quality, and no EIR that I've seen, and I've been in this arena for over a quarter of a century, and water quality is always addressed through salt. It's a very conservative constituent. Calcium-2 can model salt. It can't model non-conservative constituents, pesticides, dissolved, oxygen demand constituents. You're going to have to examine the water quality impacts by removing the dilution flows into this estuary, because they will get much, much worse. Salt will increase too, and I would just urge you that when you're using calcium-2, which is how you're going to model the alternatives in this, consider the peer review, the highly caustic and critical peer review. Consider that the newer version hasn't been peer reviewed. Calcium-2 is kind of like an Aladdin's lamp. It grants wishes to whoever rubs it. Last week, you got the state contractors saying that if you implement the Delta, if the state board implements the Delta flow standards, it is the end of life as we know it in the Central Valley. You got the same engineering firm using calcium-2 saying that if you implemented it, Davis and Woodland would still get some additional water. So, you can prove anything by it, and so I would just suggest that you approach it carefully. Thank you very much.
Mr. Jennings, having greatly compounded our problems by that interesting statement, those written comments of yours better help us get out of them so we can read them well in advance, please. Thank you.
We'll be sure to comment on your second draft.
I'm positive of that. Mr. Gazzardo. Mike Gazzardo? Yes, sir.
Good evening. My name is Mike Gazzardo, Guzzardo. That's how my father spells it anyway. I'm the Vice Commoner of the Discovery Bay Yacht Club. I'm also on the board of the Save the California Delta Alliance and on the board at the Delta Association Realtors Local Government Relations Committee. I'm on too many boards. There's a big task ahead of us all, and there's a lot of knowledge in this room. I came here tonight wondering what this process would be like, and I'm very pleased. A lot of brilliant individuals, well-spoken, great thoughts. I'm not going to give you any revelations, but I'd like to talk about a few things. First of all, it seems that you're a reasonable panel and sincere in your understanding of everyone's viewpoint. And I do hope that we are able to put the Around the Delta conveyance off the table for a while. I think that was really well spoken by Dante Jr. And also, if we could think about increasing freshwater flow to the Delta and maybe decreasing our reliance on the Delta. It was Tony or someone else who spoke earlier about desal. There's definitely a lot to be said for regional water sustainability. I think that's really important. I think that if we focus on ways to use the Delta more wisely, how about limiting water resale? I haven't heard that come up once tonight. Have any of you thought about that? But it's not come up. So I think that really ought to be looked at. There's a lot of backroom dealings. It's been well chronicled in the Chronicle. And we ought to take a look at who's using the water, why are they using it, how are they using it, could they use it better, could they use it more wisely? And I think that would go a long way toward helping come up with a plan that really works for everyone. I'm not an expert on the Delta. I grew up on the Bay and Delta. I'm a lifelong resident. We've got a treasure. It really should be a national treasure. I know it's a Northern California treasure. And so I look forward to watching the process evolve and hopefully having some input on that. And one final thing I'd like to say is, as I'm reading this, and obviously there's a lot of material to digest for tonight, and I'll go home and I'll try to get through it, but when I look at this and I look at protecting, that sounds great. Restoring. Now I'm wondering, is it restoring it to levels 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 500 years ago? I'm interested in seeing what the definition of restoring is, because if that would be, making it a more saline delta, that's not a good thing. If it's really, improving the water quality, keeping that X2 line further up toward the San Francisco Bay, improving the fisheries, and reducing people's reliance on the delta water as a plumbing fixture, I think that's a great thing. But thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Also, we've just received a copy of a letter we're going to enter in the record, and I think it's supplemental to Mr. Jennings' comment. It's dated January 24, 2011. We'll post it on our website so everybody can get a copy from the California Water Impact Network, the Sports Fishing Alliance, and the Center for Biological Diversity, and it relates to Monterey Agreement and so on. Just from skimming the first paragraph, that'll be added to the record for tonight. Thank you. Mr. Gene Beely. Is it Beely? Is that the right way to pronounce it? Okay. Thank you, sir.
Gene Beely, just retired newspaper publisher and avid Delta boater. And I've listened to everyone tonight. I purposely kind of wanted to be last, hoping, well, Mike touched on it about sale of water. I read, I think in Barbara's column, about Stuart Resnick that sold some of his water rights for $77 million a year, is it? And I'm just really confused how people like this can get away with, are we just pumping the water down there for the Stuart Resnicks of the world to sell? I mean, no one seems to be, no one can answer these questions. And I don't expect that you can either, but who can? And he's very secretive, of course. He doesn't give interviews. Journalists that have tried to interview him have failed and have been told to get off the property. I'm sure Barbara would love to interview him. And by the way, she does such a tremendous job. She should get a Pulitzer Prize for her work that she's done.
One thing I do want to say is California's been a state since 1850, and I don't know, your dad would know if he was here because he's that old. He's my law school classmate. But I believe someone once added up all the cases, and water disputes consumed 30 to 50% of most of the case law, appellate case law in the state of California for the first 75 years. It should not surprise you that we've come out of that with an immensely complex legal status of a combination of constitutional provisions, endless statutes, water permits, water contracts, riparian rights inherited from the British common law, appropriative rights developed and uniquely on our own. I mean, this is the darndest collection of things, and you are absolutely right. No one person can answer all those questions. But
yeah, I haven't found anyone who can.
No. But
I just hope that you can write something into whatever you do to prevent people from these great profiteering off of the public's water.
Yeah. Amen. By the way, I should tell you, on scoping sessions, we get different comments on whether it's the public's water or the individuals who are appearing in front of us. All the time. Anyway. Okay, is there anyone else in the audience who has not done a forum? If you'd like to come up and talk on the scoping activity, there are three of the members here. We're obviously not acting officially as the Delta Council. We're here individually. But if there are other things that are related to what we're doing that you want to talk about, yes, Barbara, could you come up and use the microphone, please? Again, identify yourself for the record, because we'll put this on our website.
Thank you. I did turn in a comment sheet. It's Barbara Barrigan Perea, BARRIGAN-PARRILLA with Restore the Delta. First off, I'd like to also remind people that today the Restore the Delta staff is here with us, Jane Wagner-Tyke and Brett Baker, who are the core behind the good writing that comes out of our organization.
Would you like to have them stand so they could, when you introduce them, please? Mr. Baker spoke to us last night down in our meeting.
Yeah. In particular, in terms of scoping comments, I'd like to address the idea of the Delta as an evolving place. The question for us always becomes, is the Delta going to evolve naturally? Is it going to evolve managed by people in a sensible way? Or are management plans going to make the Delta evolve in such a way that it implodes before it would have changed in a natural sort of way? Our great concern, presently is with the BDCP and what could possibly come out of the plan by the Delta Stewardship Council in relation to immediate economic impacts in the Delta. If the Delta as an evolving place is not managed properly, the impacts on land values could really have negative impacts on Delta communities. In particular, landowners right now whose property has already been set in various iterations of future plans for the Delta have to disclose through real estate deals the status of their property. That drives down property values. It drives down tax bases at a time when our economy needs to be sustained more than ever. You talk about Delta as evolving place. We really advocate, again, the idea of an integrated habitat restoration plan that protects agriculture at a sustainable level. You have to have levels of land use to keep agriculture profitable, and we believe that there is a balance that has to be struck there. Both things have to be done well and integrated at the same time, and those are additional things that we would like to be considered in the scoping and in the future reiterations of the plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Baker, I saw you waving a blue sheet over there.
Thank you for taking the time to hear my comments. As you mentioned,
Move that you're tall. Move that microphone up a bit so you don't have to stoop down. Mr. Baker.
So, as you mentioned, I gave you some comment last night in Clarksburg, and I just wanted to say that working with John Herrick, I've learned not to quit when I'm ahead, so I'm going to go ahead and add to that tonight.
You're going to tell us what he really meant to say, right?
No, I just one real quick comment because it's something that I lay awake sleeping about or thinking about at night. In the need for the Delta plan here, you have. I'll just read from the document. Recent events like the Lower Jones Tract levee failure and Hurricane Katrina, and recent findings that indicate a 2 in 3 chance of a major earthquake occurring in or near the Delta in the next 50 years. Have raised awareness and concerns about the vulnerability of Delta levees. Failure of Delta levees can have devastating consequences on farms, communities, roads, railways, power, and fuel transmission lines, water conveyance and quality, wildlife resources, and the local and state economy. And I would just like to point out that all that water that leaves the Delta, it all goes into this 440-mile-long cement line canal or 230-mile-long cement line canal, depending on whether it's state or federal water.
Unless it goes to Alameda County, Contra Costa County, Santa Clara County, and some of the mid-coast.
Granted.
Yeah.
So I just thought, since we're coming together with a comprehensive plan here, and we want to make sure everything is encompassed in this plan, we can include a seismic vulnerability study of the aqueduct itself, and possibly the probability, maybe it's 2/3 in the next 50 years, maybe it's less, maybe it's more. But that's an idea I stole from Dante. I believe he stole it from Napoleon, though. Your supply line, you don't want to get it too long. That's your most vulnerable point of attack there. So anyhow, thank you for your time, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Okay, are there other people who haven't had a chance who want to come on up here? Mike Machado, are you going to say anything? No? Okay. That's suspicious. Anyone else? Okay, folks, I'm sorry. Yes, ma'am. Start talking when you get to the mic, because we're recording this. Now you have to pull that microphone down.
Okay, I had a follow-on comment about seismic stability. There are significant issues with lab subsidence in the San Joaquin Valley where the aqueduct goes through.
Yes, there's a space of the aqueduct that apparently has some serious subsiding problems.
Yeah, and so really in modeling, if we're going to look at levee failure, that's right, and we also need to really look at the rate of subsidence and what's happening, and if we repair this aqueduct, if the repairs are even going to hold for a reasonable length of time.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay, anyone else? Yes, sir, please come forward. I'm not gonna force you to wait here till midnight to get home in this fog. I think
William Brooks. I've got a strange accent, but I've lived here for 30 years. I want to readdress the environmental impact, the water-related energy use, and I would actually like to consider page 12 being modified to include the third area, and I'd like to separate out the conveyance system into that third area and get the California Energy Commission involved with this. The current water transfer takes up 20% of California's energy, as we've heard. The greatest energy loss is the lifting of 3,000 feet over to Tehachapi to deliver the water to Southern California. I think there's much better spending if you look at the figures on conservation. And I think the cost of this should be addressed by the California Energy Commission, who can advise us the better.
We are close to posting on our website, on our frequently asked and answered question page, a modification of a report that was done by the California Energy Commission and Gwen Department of Water Resources, I believe, 4 years ago. And it found at that time, if I remember it correctly, that 19% of the total energy used in the state came from moving water around the state and to homes and heating and cooling. Now, I could be wrong on that. Don't hold me to it. We're going to update the chart. And I have this vague recollection that the State Water Project and the Federal Water Project in total had 6.5 or 7% of the energy use, which is big enough. But it's the getting to the end user and the heating and the cooling that was common. We're going to try to post a brief report on the website that addresses that question. Many people have raised it, and we want to know the answers too.
Okay, because it looks like there's now 5 pump stations that can drain the river at Clarksburg. And it looks like the consequences of the new energy required for this will be catastrophic for taxpayers. I think it's a really bad move. It should be separated out as a separate issue. Southern California. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, anybody else? Going once? Going twice? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, well, this is that is our technician who does the sound system. I'm not going to let you near my microphone at all.
Hi, I'm from Southern California, and I just wanted to say, well, my name is John Stringfield. That's JohnStringfield. I just want to say this. This is the first time I've heard about any of this, really. So you should probably spread the word a little bit more in Southern California, so we know exactly what your needs are, because this is really the first time I've heard of most of it. I'm just saying.
Hey, that's terrific. Thank you very much. Okay, that's really nice. Hey, thank you very much for taking the time. Again, open invitation. All our council meetings are public on the web. You can watch them if you want. If you want to show up, John shows up to a number of the meetings. Do it. Written information, comments, observations, recommendations, very important. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Drive carefully, please. Please.